You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and thanks for making your way back to visit me on Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I am Mighty Blue, or Steve Adams, and this is episode number 327. This is going to be somewhat different from most of our shows. Do you remember a couple of weeks back when I spoke with Nathan Wright and his wife Kim about the arguments against moving the Southern Terminus of the Appalachian Trail to Alabama? Well, I asked for somebody who'd like to present a counter view, and I said at the time that I would have Nathan back on to debate that counter view. Jeff Hayes responded to that call. I tried my best to keep things fair by speaking first with just Jeff, although Nathan was listening in. In that way, each of them had the opportunity to hear the other's point of view before they started to debate. We have both sides of that conversation today, with first Jeff presenting his case, then a small break while I catch up with Katie Westling on the resumption of her AT hike, before Nathan and Jeff talk together with me as a questioner. It was very respectful on both sides, and I'd love to know what you'll think. I'll give my thoughts at the end. By the way, I just found out Jeff's trail name is Speedo, and I'd have loved to have asked him why, but, well, opportunity missed. There'll be no reading today, mainly because I didn't want the show to go over 90 minutes. I'll be back reading George Stephanos' Then the Hail Came next week. Also, of course, we're not catching up with the Mighty Blue class of 2022, and we've had another casualty, but we'll talk about that next week. Now, just a warning, some of the sound, particularly from Jeff's recording, had quite a bit of background noise, and Jeff was moving about himself quite a bit. I was able to cut quite a lot of it out, but in the end I had to go back and literally delete every moment that he went silent. It makes for better listening, though, as you'd imagine, when he does talk, some of the background noise is still there. I think overall it sounds pretty good. So let's start by hearing from Jeff Hayes, or, as we just learned, Speedo. Here he is. So a couple of weeks ago, I had Nathan and Kim Wright on the show, arguing that moving the Southern Terminus of the Appalachian Trail to Alabama would be counterproductive and not in the best interests of either the Appalachian Trail or the Pinhoti. I offered anybody with a counter view to come on the show and make their case. Happily, Dr. Jeff Hayes responded, so he's here today to make the case. Hey, Jeff, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Steve.
Well, it's a pleasure, obviously. Now, listening in, just so listeners know, is Nathan, because Jeff's heard what Nathan had to say, so it seemed fair that Nathan would know what Jeff has to say as well. And then once Jeff has made the case, we'll have both guys debating the issue. So, Jeff, you provided me with a draft of a so far really well-researched document that makes the case. In it, you draw some conclusions that you admit to being currently speculative. You also told me that you have a lot more research to do. Can you tell us how you became involved in this project in the first place?
Well, when I was the interim or the incoming president of the Alabama Hiking Trail Society,
right,
the Alabama Trails Foundation convened a group of stakeholders with the express purpose to upgrade. There were two thrusts: to upgrade the Pinhoti beyond National Park standards in order to entice the Appalachian Trail Conservancy to extend the Appalachian Trail into Alabama. That group was known as the Pinhoti Steering Committee. We convened in 2016. Subsequently, we met a number of times to discuss issues. The Alabama Trails Foundation and the Pinhoti Steering Committee hired me to hike the entire Pinhoti and to document all of its infrastructure,
nice,
to identify potential sites for campsites or new shelters, to gauge and evaluate the water sources, etc. In fact, if you look at, it's far out now, it used to be Gut Hook. I'm not a photographer. That I took 2,000 pictures and gave them, I called up Gut Hook and I said, I know you got an app coming out on the Pinhoti. let's get it out sooner. I checked with the Alabama Trails Foundation. They said, yeah, you can give him our tracks, you can give him our photos. So I've been involved officially with the state of Alabama's work with the Pinhoti since 2016. But, I grew up here. Nancy and I, I'm a retired Presbyterian minister. Nancy and I led youth groups on the Pinhoti in the early 2000s when we moved here. So I've got a lot of history with the Pinhoti.
So the crux of your case was laid out in this paper. And I know you're not sharing the paper, which is fine because it's only a draft right now, and you say you've still got some work to do with it. So for the benefit of listeners, what is the crux of the case for moving the southern terminus of the Appalachian Trail?
Steve, thank you. When I talk to people that are not from Alabama, a lot of times, and some folks from Alabama, they make me answer the why question first. They say, why Alabama? And I want to respond and say, why not Alabama? Because I think it is clear, and this is not speculative, that the founders of the ATC did intend to include Alabama in some way in the Appalachian Trail. Now, whether that's a branch or an extension, I'm not sure. However, I am pretty sure that they discussed extending it to Katahdin in Maine and, quote, Birmingham, Alabama, in the same breath. They spoke with them in the same way. And so if I look at the history, and again, my historical research is preliminary with readily available documents, I think there's a good case to be made that at that first ATC conference in Washington, D.C. in 1925, the founders intended for the AT to come to Alabama. So there's a historical case that I think one can make, and I'll be doing further research to make that case. There's also a geologic case to make. There are 16 states that hold the Appalachian Mountain Range, if you include kind of the general consensus. There are 14 of those that hold the Appalachian Trail. South Carolina and Alabama, both are not part of that. Now, I think both states, if my, again, preliminary research, have an argument to make to the ATC, to the trail community, that in the beginning, at the founding of this great thing we call the Appalachian Trail, the founders intended to include both states in some way, but they don't now. So I would say, if I'm going to boil it down, and Steve, you know me, I get going. There are two reasons. There's that.
Yeah, we talked yesterday.
Yeah. On the one hand, the ATC, they told us they would do it. They didn't. On the second hand, we're just as good as any of those other states. And we've got just as good of mountains. And I'm very proud of Alabama. I'm very proud of the mountains we have in our state. And we match up with all of them.
So do the South Carolina Trail Societies want it to come through South Carolina as far as you know? Is there any push for that there?
I have not spoken to anybody. Okay. I do know this, though, that on it's like the board of the directors or one of the advisory boards to the ATC, they have a representative from South Carolina. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're discussing it in some way, or why they would have somebody from South Carolina there. I'm not exactly sure. But I have not discussed it with the folks in South Carolina. And
like it or not, currently the AT is from Georgia to Maine. It's what the organisers built. Whatever people may have thought in 1925, the organisers decided that Georgia to Maine was going to be what it was. And from what you're saying, there had been a proponent of Alabama to Maine, an Alabama to Maine AT back in the late 20s and early 30s. Had there been a proponent of the Alabama to Maine AT back in the 20s and 30s, then maybe it would have happened. But your argument, one of your arguments was that Benton Mackay, being from Maine, wanted to push it on to Katahdin, and he had his way doing it. And you're saying if there were a Benton Mackay type person, would perhaps have done the same thing for Alabama.
Now, go back a minute, Steve. That wasn't Benton Mackay. That was Myron Avery.
Myron Avery. Sorry, Myron Avery. Myron Avery, right. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. But vested interest in projects often end with an outcome that is not acceptable to all. Yet decisions are made, and the AT is known as being from Georgia to Maine. You're an academic. So Is this an academic project for you, or do you genuinely feel there's a distinct benefit? Because this is important to me. There's a distinct benefit to the hiking and non-hiking communities to bring the trail to Alabama.
Yeah, let me answer that as an academic. We academics, Steve, don't think an academic exercise is ever just an academic exercise.
By the way, that wasn't pejorative.
No, I understand.
So you know.
But the academic issues that engage me passionately are ones that have good, solid roots in the ground. So in terms of benefit, would including Alabama in the Appalachian Trail benefit the citizens of the state of Alabama? Yes. Would including Alabama in the Appalachian Trail benefit the hiking community? Yes. Alabama has one long end-to-end trail, the Pinhoti Trail, which again is a great trail. And let me put in a plug. Next Step Hostel in Talladega, we're a full-service hostel on the Pinhoti, and we're trail angels. We do it just like every trail angel you ever met. We don't charge for it, but it's a great place to stop. I'm not going to say it's as good as the Pinhoti Outdoor Center.
But we should have put some music either side of that, by the way, to let people know it was a pub. But that's okay, yeah. So, and you said...
Okay, so...
yes, exactly. So let's get back to the point now, yeah.
So the hiking community, there's just one trail north of Cheehaw through the Talladega National Forest, and there's a whole lot of space for another one. In terms of economy, yes. Now, sometimes bringing the trail here gets pejoratively dismissed by people saying, it's all about money. No, it's not. It's about economy.
Which is different to money. I agree, it's different to money, yeah.
So, for instance, one of the issues facing the ATC is that there's, in common parlance, there's too much traffic on the AT. Some of that has to do with there being a trail that is only so far in length. Some of it has to do with the character of hiking and crowds at the termini. Some of it just has to do with there are way more people hiking. I think including Alabama in the AT would give us an opportunity to build a new trail sector that could demonstrate to the ATC and the hiking community how to do a 21st century trail, not a 20th century trail. Because the problem is not too many feet, the problem is not enough trail. The AT and even the Pinhoti were built to 20th century trail hiker community standards. If Bill Bryson had not written A Walk in the Woods, probably wouldn't have this crowding problem now.
Sure.
But he did, because somebody was going to write that book. And,
yeah, hang on. You talk about not enough trail, not enough feet, or not enough trail rather. By extending it to Alabama, you provide more trail, therefore it would be less of a crowding issue. But the start is still the start, isn't it? And the reason the biggest crowds are obviously at the start, especially in March. You get 50 people starting a day. Yeah. Well, if you extended it back to that mountain, Cheehaw Mountain.
Yeah, I'm from Alabama. Some people say it Cheehaw.
Well, I say Appalachian, even though I used to say Appalachian, but okay. Yeah. So if you extend the start back to Cheehaw Mountain, aren't you merely relocating the problem?
Actually, no. You're fundamentally changing the type of access to the termini that you support. One of the reasons that they moved it from Oglethorpe back in 1958, the ATC moved the Southern Terminus from Oglethorpe to Springer, is because Oglethorpe had a lot of traffic, and they wanted to make the terminus, Southern Terminus, intentionally remote to keep people off of it.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes. Yeah.
And now Springer cannot handle the foot traffic. You see the same problem at Katahdin. So many people are hiking now. Baxter State Park each year goes through this process. How do we limit people getting up to the terminus? Sure. If you move it to Cheehaw, you make it a public terminus, and that's a fundamental change because Cheehaw has extensive facilities and are planning to build more at Cheehaw State Park.
Sorry, hang on. I want to step back from that because 1st of March, you head up to the Southern Terminus, the Appalachian Trail, which is Cheehaw Mountain, let's say.
Correct.
You make one step on the trail, you're part of the problem. Because you've got people, 50 people starting a day, 60 people starting a day, whatever the number is. That first night, at whichever shelter you get to, are you saying that you, in your proposed new trail, you would extend the amount of facilities and stuff around camping. So it's not just a small shelter with about 50 tents around it, which it is on the AT. Is that what you're proposing, that you have an entirely new trail? No part of the Pinhoti goes into this, no part of the Benton Mackay, as I understand,
That's correct.
are not impinged by the trail. This is an entirely new trail.
Yeah, let me make sure. Thank you,
Sorry,
Steve.
let me just finish that question. Okay. So those first shelters, and say Gooch and Hawk Mountain on the Appalachian Trail, are pretty crowded those early days. Are you saying with the building of a new type of trail, whatever that looks like, and I'm not sure I've got in my mind precisely what that looks like, are you saying that will reduce the problem of overcrowding because it will effectively grow to the size to be able to cater with the overcrowding that is there?
Yeah, let's pursue that. And Steve, in these discussions, you give me ideas, and that's a good thing. So right now, the case at Springer is the infrastructure is probably built to accommodate 20 people at the most.
Comfortably. I've done this twice now, and it was a push to get everyone settled in. But to be honest with you, Jeff, it kind of worked out because you all scooch up here and you scooch up there. It's a pain in the arse sometimes, but at the end of the day, it does work. And all I'm saying is, I feel that unless you are going to expand facilities quite dramatically in Cheeha, you're literally just relocating the problem. That's what strikes me from reading what you said and speaking to you yesterday, and that's the thing that's sticking with me. So I wonder what the counter to that is.
So, for instance, let's say that instead of when I look at the infrastructure, you can look at it and say, when the people built it, how many people do they expect? Let's say we built the infrastructure of a trail, anyone at the terminus, to expect 100 people a day. What would that look like? Now, the advantage of Cheeha is that infrastructure on the mountain is already there. Cheeha State Park could handle 100 hikers a day with its facilities. Amicalola State Park cannot. All right, so let's start there. You have a Southern Terminus that is built publicly accessible and with extensive resources to host a lot of people. Then from there, where do you go? The Blue Mountain Shelter is a typical 2-story shelter about a mile from Cheeha State Park. But let's say that you intended to build a new trail segment, and thank you for pointing that out, a new trail segment that intentionally expected way more people than the Appalachian Trail expects to use. Let's say you did establish a campground site that had enough facilities in that campground intentionally to accommodate that many people. Now, that many people would just be at the start and the end of the thru-hiking season, perhaps. But if you built that, you could anticipate the amount of feet you're going to have, and you could build in response to it. Further, if I were doing it, and please know, I do not propose routes on the ground because I think those decisions are best made by people on the ground. Sure. But I would run a route close to Oxford, which from Cheeha, Oxford is at the most a 2-day hike, and make sure that Oxford is engaged and encourage them to have facilities to handle this peak load. Same way with the city of Heflin, same way with the city of Anniston, same way with Jacksonville, same way with Piedmont. What you would have at this end of the trail is something that would be anticipatory, that would anticipate the amount of traffic you could get through the 21st century. 100, 200 people a day who are starting out a thru-hike. Though, remember, Steve, that's not the main users of the Appalachian Trail.
Absolutely. Yeah, I understand that. And funny, you mentioned those towns, and going through making these trail towns might be quite interesting for some people. Because in your paper, you refer to the need for this new part of the AT, and I think that was important to stress that it's an entirely new trail, to be intentionally accessible to folks in the towns of Oxford, Anniston, Jacksonville, Piedmont, Heflin, Alabama, and to the towns of Cave Spring, Rome, Dalton, Chatsworth, LEJ, and East LEJ in Georgia. What do you mean? What does intentionally accessible mean to you?
Yeah, Nancy and I were leading backpacking camps in Central Virginia in 1998 when Earl Schaefer came through on his 50th anniversary hike.
Nice.
Now, we missed him by about two weeks, and I hated that because, to have these high school kids and sit them down with a hiking legend, it's like taking them down and seeing Nimblewheel, right? You just don't get to meet Earl Schaefer every day. But the people that hiked with Earl Schaefer said there's two things about him. One, he's great at yogiing, absolutely marvelous at yogiing. The second thing, he spent all of his time grumping about dumb up and downs and that they'd taken the trail out of the towns. Because see, when Earl hiked the trail in 1948, there were a lot more hot springs, there were a lot more Damascuses, there were a lot more Harper's Ferries. The trail intentionally included towns. Now, let's go back for a minute because that's important. Today, we think of the trail being a wilderness trail. I'm going to put that in quotes because
it's really not. This is very accessible for everybody.
It's very accessible. One of the reasons that the folks who built it, and let's go back to Myron Avery and the original ATC, wanted it to go close to urban centers is so you got volunteer help.
Yeah.
And one of the issues about extending it to Katahdin was that there's no town up there.
Sure.
And so they brought the trail through urban centers so you could get people on it to build it and maintain it. Now, for me, what that means is, one, that's a good practice to be accessible to these towns because people in the towns can get to them. But I also want to speak about accessibility because Benton Mackay in his 1921 article argued that, we want this trail accessible to people up and down the eastern seaboard.
Sure.
If I use that word today, it means much more, I think, than Benton Mackay did. I want to model to the ATC how to build a 21st century trail segment that is accessible not just to able-bodied young men who can afford the equipment and the time to hike it, but is accessible to old men on a day hike, accessible.
I'm an old man. Careful.
You see my gray hair, Steve. Is accessible to underserved communities, is accessible to people with different limitations in terms of sight, in terms of hearing, in terms of mobility, is accessible to as many people as possible, not a few chosen who can do it, but it's accessible. Now, that doesn't mean we pave a road and call it the AT. No, it doesn't mean that. But it means that if we build a new trail segment, intentionally we find as many places as we can to build sections or small trail sections or larger trail sections that are accessible to as many people as possible. Yes. And to do that,
are you trying to make it, does that naturally make it easier?
Makes it easier
and it's going to sound terrible, Bob, and I don't mean to say it, and I want you to realise I'm prefacing what I'm going to say.
Okay.
It's almost like the equivalent of dumbing down something to me, which sounds terribly rude to people who can't do this. But one of the reasons people do this, because it's so bloody difficult. It's not because it's meant to be easy. And I love the idea of accessibility, but there are limits on that accessibility. You go through the roots and the rocks in Maine and stuff like that. They are tough. And they're tough for a reason, and that's why people love it. I can tell you, I had Nathan on originally because I agreed with his point of view, and I'm totally unapologetic about that. I think the Appalachian Trail is perfect. And the reason I think it's perfect, particularly running from Georgia to Maine, is that there are so many things that become iconic in your minds. And certainly when I started reading about the AT, the thought of being at the top of Springer with my pack on my back was just brought chills to me because it was such an iconic place in my mind. McAfee Knob was another iconic place. Obviously, Katahdin is an iconic place. There are various other places and hot springs and so on. Changing it because 100 years ago somebody mentioned they wanted to go to a certain place strikes me to be unnecessary because I think it's so perfect. However, I respect the ideas that you have. I'm just wondering what the hiking community, specifically in Alabama, what's their general reaction to your thought process? You're having these conversations because you're involved, I guess, locally in the hiking clubs, you say, and obviously you've got the hostel. How do they respond to your proposals?
Let's go back a minute because you started out thinking, I started out talking about accessibility.
Yeah.
And, okay, so I think when you mention the challenge, you're talking about through hiking the thing, or maybe the particularly difficult spots like the White Mountains. And we've all hiked them. We know how hard they are. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an average everyday citizen of the state of Alabama having the opportunity to walk 20 feet on the AT, 1 mile on the AT. Bill Bryson irritated a lot of people at the end of his book because he said, I didn't hike the whole thing, but I hiked the AT. And he's actually right. Yeah. The Alabama Hiking Trail Society brought Jennifer Farr Davis down in 2018 to hike the whole Pinhoti because she went to school over here in Sanford and Birmingham and had never hiked it. And so we hired her to come and speak at the conference and hike it and send it out into her social media network to hike it. At the time, she was saying this. Here's what I heard her at an event in Birmingham, and she said, here's what hiking is to me. It's merely standing in the wilderness. Okay, what Jennifer was trying to do was to scale back hiking, official hiking, from doing a long trail like the Appalachian Trail, the PCT, or the CDT, to simply standing in the wilderness. And I think she's right. So when you say we want it to be difficult, I have two things. One, what are you thinking about when you say difficult? There are tons of places on the AT that are not difficult, that are easy.
Which makes it perfect to me.
Yeah, I understand.
That's part of it's the perfect imperfections of the AT that make it perfect to me.
I just don't think it's perfect. The second thing is when you say we want it to be challenging, I'm saying challenging for whom? You and I, we're aging out. It can be challenging for us where it won't be challenging for a young punk just out of high school.
Sure.
When you ask for it to be challenging, there's a scale where you have to say, challenging for whom? It's not challenging for David Breeshears, who's a famous filmmaker who's hiked Everest any number of times. It's not challenging for him. For a newbie hiker.
For the vast majority of people, this is a challenging endeavor because it does not only involve the physical capability. In fact, it's only about 20%, 10%, 20% physical. It's nearly all about your mindset. And again, so those people in Alabama, if they want to come on the trail, they can go on the trail. They just have to drive to another state. I mean, you're right. Yes. I mean, I can see kind of why they might want it. But my question to you was, what is the attitude towards the Alabamians, towards this project?
If you're going to refer to Alabamians, Steve, just call us the winners in the world.
Oh, God, I don't get that at all. Okay.
You don't get that? No. Deacon Blues it's actually kind of tongue-in-cheek.
No, right. So
they got a name for the winners in the world.
So what what is the general attitude of the hiking community in not only the hiking community, actually the non-hiking community as well? What's the attitude that you're getting from this project?
Let me say this. Way back when the resistance to AT to Alabama started, and it was started primarily because, and I am a member of a team. Some of my team members promoted publicly the idea of taking over the Pinhoti and the Alabama Pinhoti, Georgia Pinhoti, and Benton MacKaye trails, and I have always been staunchly against that.
Right.
And my proposal of a new trail segment is because I think that's the only way forward. But in response, there were a number of folks online that tried to generate social media opinions about it. I did the same thing in response and just briefly put up polls on about 4 or 5 Facebook pages. And this is not data, okay? This is not data. This is just what I saw in the polls. On 2 of the sites, one, I got blocked from the site. This was a Pinhoti Trail site. Another one refused to put the poll. But in the polls that were up, on one site, it was the primary opposition site to AT to Alabama. Yeah, it was drastically in favor of never having the Southern Terminus of the Appalachian Trail put in Alabama.
Okay.
And that was the choice they selected. I had 4 choices. Should Alabama be included in the Appalachian Trail? No, not under any circumstances. Yes, if it doesn't use the Pinhoti. Yes, in any way possible. No opinion.
Sure.
The majority of the sites, except for that first one, those who answered the poll, and again, Steve, this is not data. To answer the poll, it was not a landslide in favor, but the two selections, yes, if it doesn't use the Pinhoti, and yes, at any cost, bring the AT here, outnumbered those on the other side. Now, our team is going to, my team includes the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, the Alabama State Parks, Cheaha State Parks, we are working on a survey that will be prosecuted correctly to give us statistically valid information.
Okay.
And so there are 3 or 4 million, about 4.5 million people in Alabama. You need 100,000 people to answer that question. Okay. Should Alabama be included in the AT? So when you say the community, I want to know where the boundaries of that are.
I mean the towns themselves, people who have any sort of interest in this. So I understand that response. Do you believe, though, and I don't know the geography of Alabama at all, and I apologise for that, but do you believe that the Pinhoti will be impacted by a new trail in any way? Because people can still walk from on the Pinhoti, on the Bent Mackay, and to Katahdin, just as Nimblewell did last year.
Sure, of course.
Is there a reason that you can see that the Pinhoti will be affected deleteriously?
Okay, it's a good question. And first of all, the approach that I'm taking is to try to ensure that the Pinhoti stays the Pinhoti. The Pinhoti, you say the AT is perfect. I'm sorry, Steve, the Pinhoti is perfect just as it is. Uh-huh. So I want to maintain that. Now, one of the reasons to build a new trail is to intentionally create loop trails. And I would want a loop trail out coming off of Cheaha State Park, at Oxford, Anniston, along these towns. And that would engage the Pinhoti. But I want loop trails because when I hike the Pinhoti for the Alabama Trails Foundation, one of the issues we found with the Pinhoti is that there are so few places where somebody can do a loop instead of an out and back.
All right.
So if I were to have an ideal route for a new trail segment, it would intentionally, make loops like with the town of Heflin with the Pinhoti. But that's not, I don't think that's what you're getting at. Let's say, I'm not going to say that building a new trail segment would be 100% non-effective to the Pinhoti, because it's not. I think one of the issues that I'm trying to address is that in everybody's mind, and probably in reality, there's a limited pot of money. Even though the Fed can print money, there's just a limited amount. Yeah. And if money goes from one thing to another, the first thing tends to suffer, yes. And so if I think about a limited pot of Alabama money using to build this new trail segment, then
this new 21st century trail, that's an interesting concept to me, not necessarily in a good way, but also in an interesting way. You know, as I'm fascinated with that idea. But you're right, the money is so finite in this country. We think we are the richest country in the world, but we seem to be able to find money to do certain things, but absolutely no chance of doing other things. So that always worries me. Now, listen, Nathan's been waiting for about 30 odd minutes, which was my plan to you each have about 30 odd minutes. What I'd like to do is bring Nathan back in right now. So that's where we left off, with Nathan about to enter the virtual recording studio, and we'll be hearing that in about 10 minutes. In the meantime, I caught up with Katie Westling yesterday. She's in the Grayson Highlands, surrounded by ponies, and chatting with me about her progress of these first few days back on the trail. Here's Katie.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, Katie, how are you?
I'm good. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries. No worries. Now, we're recording. That's the important thing. And you are I can hear some wind around you. You're in the Grayson Highlands. Is that right?
I am. I'm specifically at a site called the Scales, and I had to stand and wait for this small herd to walk past me so I could keep going.
Pretty remarkable up there, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's nice. You do some rock stepping, and then you come out onto a beautiful meadow, and then it kind of repeats itself.
Right.
So
try to move your head around a little bit to try to keep out the wind. I can hear the wind blowing quite a bit. Okay. Right.
Okay.
Actually, that sounds fine now. There's no wind now. It's good. So how long have you been going then now?
So I did a 30-mile section in North Carolina, then came up to Damascus, and I am about, I'm about halfway from Damascus to Marion, Virginia.
Right.
So north of 4 days out of Damascus. I'm on my 4th day out.
And you hiked directly from Damascus up the mountain there, right. Okay. So what's it been like so far?
It's familiar.
Funny.
It feels familiar. You do have some climbs, but for the most part, it's an up and down that it's not super dramatic.
No, it's not.
So lots of streams. Again, I'm here in Grayson Highlands, and the ponies are amazing, and all the rhododendron are in bloom.
Nice.
And the mountain laurel's in bloom, so it's beautiful. You'll just walk for a mile surrounded by beautiful blossoms and.
I'm sure. So, and going at this time of year, we're recording on the 15th of June, and it's going to go out tomorrow morning. So your mile, it's about 500 miles, I think.
I'm a little over 500 miles.
Is the Grayson Highlands. So you've completed those miles south of you, and you've completed some miles north of you, haven't you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
right, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. From here, I'll be ultimately going to Rockfish Gap.
Right, that's right.
Which is the south end of the Shenandoahs.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing with this section.
Right. And your plans to get back off again for a while and have a rest up, or are you going to try to push this out this year?
No. Once I finish Rockfish Gap, I'll go home. I have to change out some of my gear, probably, add a base layer.
Sure.
And get my puffy back.
Right.
And then I'll go up, and I have a section in Vermont to finish, and then 100 miles in southern New Hampshire to finish. So
right.
Yeah.
Right. You're kind of getting there, aren't you?
Yeah. I'm feeling pretty good. I was interested to see how things would happen, and my first week I was doing it like an average of 8.5 miles, and this week I'm on my 4th day, I think, and averaging about 10 miles. So
you have to build up again, don't you? Was it a shock to the system, or did you kind of?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, because as you say, you kind of feel at home. I know that when I went second time, I immediately knew where I was, and that was very helpful to me, I must admit. But the physicality still has to be attained again, doesn't it?
That's right. Yeah. Oh, I'm nowhere where I was when I got off last fall. But what is the same is the routine, the efficiency and the routine of your, setting camp and breaking camp. So is the same.
You enjoying that? Are you enjoying that routine again?
Of course I am. Yes. Yeah. It's easy. It's just you do the same thing. You know how to set up your tent the way you want it inside, and you know the order of how you want to do things, and that's nice. I like that. I did camp on the downside of what was it? A White Top Mountain, when had about 4 storms roll through that night, and my gosh, I was stealth camping, and I was in this little copse of woods, and that was nice, but it was where they get the myth about the dragon under the mountain. Man, that thing would roar overhead. And
Were you frightened? Were you frightened at all?
Yes, I was. That was probably the closest. At one point, there was no thunder, and I felt like I was right in one of the waves that came over. It was just like flashing, like all around me. I mean, it was like I was in this thing.
And did your tent hold up well?
Oh, it was amazing. I love my tent. So it just, it sure did. So
are you by yourself most of the time now? Because, of course, most of the people will have gone past Grace and the Highlands now. So what is it like out there by yourself? Or are you meeting plenty of section hikers and day hikers?
I am meeting section hikers, quite a few section hikers. You know, you see them, you pass and say hi. And there's still a few northbounders. I think probably, might have spent too much time in Hot Springs, and now they're moving northward.
Easily done, yeah.
Yeah. So, but no, I'm mostly by myself, and I enjoy that. It's it's nice to meet up with people, but I feel like I do better if I know I'm going at my own pace and on my own agenda.
Well, I know that one or two of our listeners have reached out to you, haven't they? And
they sure have.
To give you some trail magic and that. So you obviously made some friends last year. I think that part of the trip where people selflessly want to help you is just been a blessing to you, hasn't it?
It sure has, man. It's like a holiday. When you see someone and you just are so excited to meet up and chat. I love that.
So when do you reckon you're going to get to Rockfish Gap? Have you got a plan?
I'm thinking, it might be optimistic. I'm thinking by mid-July.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. I'm giving it, the total section was like 390 miles,
right,
like around that. Yeah. And I'm, I'm still doing below what the average I want to hit, but I'm thinking I can do it in the whole thing in 4 to 5 weeks.
Well, you know what? There's no particular hurry for you, is there, when you need to get back anywhere?
Yeah.
And also, you will definitely increase in miles because you did first time and you will do this time as well. So I wouldn't worry about, there's no point in worrying about that. You'll get there when you get there, won't you? And that's the best way to look at any hike. When I get there is when I'm going to get there. So that works.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look,
4 to 5 weeks. That's what it should be.
Okay, well, we'll catch up again. We'll probably start trying to keep in touch with you every week now, as you're going forward. And so we'll catch up with you soon, all right?
All right, sounds great, Steve.
Okay, bye then.
Okay, all right, bye-bye.
She is a trooper, isn't she? I entirely understand how she feels very comfortable with it all. That was definitely the feeling I had when I started my 2019 hike. All those fears I had at the beginning of my first hike have been replaced by calmness because I'd done that first hike and I knew what to expect. Katie gets it. I'm sure it will serve her well. Thanks this week go to our donors once more. It's been an expensive week for the network with a couple of unexpected annual bills to pay, so monthly donors Todd Withrow and Suzanne Johnson certainly helped ease the pain, as did a generous donation from Deb Taylor. Thank you so much. If you'd like to help, just click on one of the many donate buttons on the Hiking Radio Network website and I'll be very grateful indeed. So let's get back to Jeff and Nathan. Here they are. So Nathan's back on. Jeff's relit his pipe, so we're good to go. So we're away. And I've got a couple of questions. You both now heard everything the other one said.
Yes.
So the two of you are now in the same room, virtually. And as I say, you both heard each other's point of view. Let's start with the things that each of you said and the objections that you each have to the points made by the other side. And since Nathan was on with his points first, Jeff, what did he and Kim say that you actually disagreed with last week? Because I know you listened last week. You told me you did.
That the Pinhoti Outdoor Center is the only full-service hostel on the Alabama Pinhoti Trail.
There's qualifications for that, but hey, there's more coming. So I'm excited. That's economic impact to me. Any businesses that open, whether it be hostels or shuttle service or whatever. There's going to be, I know of 2 more coming probably by this fall that I've been working with to help open. So it's going to be, I love seeing that growth and the impact that the Pinhoti can have.
But apart from your second plug, Jeff, what are the things you didn't agree with?
That just so your listeners know, Nathan and I are not enemies.
Oh, yeah.
At opposite end of the spectrum, we work together all the time on the Pinhoti. Yeah. And so, I want Pinhoti Outdoor Center to succeed for all the reasons that Nathan and Kim. Again, when you ask me to disagree with Nathan and Kim, no, because I heard primarily what they're doing is supporting the Pinhoti qua Pinhoti, to leave the Pinhoti unaffected by bringing the AT here. And we're in 100% agreement on that. I don't disagree with any of Nathan and Kim's arguments on why the Pinhoti should remain the Pinhoti. I don't. Now, I'm curious, Nathan, why... let's say, and we're in a very speculative area, but let's say that we could build an entirely new trail segment that would leave the Pinhoti alone, that would become the AT in Alabama. And let's just imagine that we could build a 21st century trail that could handle the traffic. I know that's a big ask. But Nathan, I want to hear more clearly objections to that.
Well, I'll start with Benton MacKay. I do believe that that was never part of his dream. I think the map that's been used for that information showing Birmingham, there is a map from the 20s that shows Birmingham as an extension or a branch, but Birmingham's not the only one that shows that. It actually goes up Chattanooga, down to Atlanta, probably Stone Mountain. Mm-hmm. DC, other branches all the way along that trail system. And I think that's what the Pinhoti was originally doing. I think it serves that purpose now. It connects Alabama to the AT, and it serves that. And I think it actually will help, as it grows, help offload some of that traffic that the AT is seeing at the beginning. Because we are seeing Bama to Baxter hikers, or even ECT hikers all the way out of Florida. So that's that would be my first contingency, our first
Okay, let me
point.
answer that if I can, Nathan, because I agree with you. I have not found any place where Benton MacKay said, let's put the trail in Alabama. I have not. Now, I have also not read deeply into Benton MacKay's correspondence and articles. I will do that at some point, but I haven't. My argument, and I don't say Benton MacKay, my argument is the founders of the ATC intended in some way for this trail to come to Alabama.
Okay, I have every Benton MacKay book and biography if you want to borrow it. We've read them all, and I say we, Nimble and myself, and actually have been in contact with some of the authors. And we have the notes. There were no minutes taken at the original ATC meeting, the conference when it was convened. And when it was voted on for the terminus, Alabama was never mentioned. Benton MacKay was at this meeting, and there was no Alabama discussion whatsoever. So, and talking to the biographers and reading all the books, it's just not there. So,
actually, Nathan, I'm going to stop you there, because in the ATC's 75th anniversary of Trail Days, the ATC describes at that first meeting that the conveners considered extending the trail in two ways: north to Cotton in Maine and south to Lookout Mountain, and then to Birmingham, Alabama. Now, that's from the ATC.
What do they say today?
They may not have it right.
When you talk to them today, what do they say?
Oh, today, yeah, and I'm not saying they're in favor of doing it today, Nathan.
Okay.
When I talked to him today, and I've talked with a representative from him, he says, we trace our DNA to the 1967 National Trail Act, not to the founder's intention. Yes.
And you mentioned that act in your paper as well, don't you? The National Trails Act.
Yes.
But, I think I'll come back to what I said earlier on. When they did set up the AT, they set it up in the way they've set it up. They've made some changes over the years, but by and large, it's a Georgia to Maine hike. And even if you found that there was the intention of Benton Mackay to include Alabama. That has obviously been either overlooked or disagreed with because they've set it up as they've set it up. So to me, it seems to me you'd then be making change for change's sake. The only thing I think you've said that certainly what you wrote, which I did agree with. This is interesting. The thought of a new trail that's so accessible to more people, and that may well be its own trail. And you can give people the chance to be on their own trail, that'd be great. And you can call it frankly, you can call it the Southern Terminus if you like. It probably won't be the Southern Terminus. I'm just kind of wondering where the state of this is. Is this in the hands of politicians? Is it in the hands of moneyed interests? Is it in the hands of hikers? What is the current state of play with your proposal to move this trail?
Now, Steve, it feels like I'm debating both you and Nathan now.
No, I just don't like saying nothing for about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I understand that.
No, I think of things as someone says something, I think of things, and I want to ask that question. Is what I'm asking.
Let me make this point again because I am not saying Benton Mackay said bring the trail to Alabama.
Right.
Not the Southern Terminus. I think Benton Mackay knew we were here, but I'm not saying that. Right. I'm saying at the first ATC conference in 1925 in Washington, D.C., yes, Alabama was part of the discussion, and yes, according to the ATC's own documents. Now, let's just say that, the ATC gets to call all the shots on this. I want to ask them, why did you not include Alabama? I don't want to say answer why Alabama first. I want somebody to answer why not Alabama first. Let's say we were there in the founding. Well, what happened? They intended to do it. Why didn't they? You see, that's when somebody says up front.
I understand the question.
Yeah, we're going to do this.
I understand
the question. And it's like, well, why didn't you?
And I don't think I'm debating you here. I'm just asking. Mm-hmm. To me, when you say that, I'm asking why that would make sense to you, because they've made the choice they've made. They knew Alabama existed as a state back in 1927, 25, whenever it was. And so they just made the choice not to do it. And that's the bit I can't see why they would necessarily go back on that choice. They did it for a reason. Of course there can be changes at any time at all, but unless you can make this, which is make an unassailable argument that this would benefit both the AT and the citizens of Alabama. And for me, listening to both of you quite closely, the argument hasn't actually been made that it's going to, in the way it's going to benefit. And also, frankly, there are so many logistical things that happen on a trail that need to happen on a trail. There's a lot of infrastructure to be put in as well, isn't there? And you did refer to that yesterday, so I want to give you the chance to talk about the infrastructure, because I know that's a thing that's important to you as well.
You talking?
Yeah. So, who are you asking?
Are you talking about when you say infrastructure? What do you mean infrastructure? You mean shelters or
shelters and the accessibility to towns to get off and get food and some mail drops and all that sort of stuff that you do when you're on the AT?
I would say the Pinhoti has that. I mean, we are perfectly laid out in mileages from town to town, accessibility wise, through Alabama, and Georgia has a lot of road walking still today. So, I think we have some room to improve there. Alabama is working very quickly to get the remaining small, total 16 miles off the road. Most of that will be gone this calendar year. But from Flag to Sylacauga, where the POC is, to Talladega, where the next step hostel is, to Cheehaw, to Heflin, to Piedmont, to Cave Springs. I mean, it's perfectly laid out for beginners or even, experienced hikers to get through and resupply. I think.
Yeah, and Nathan, speak to Steve about your work. We did discuss this a little bit with AHTS, about how shelters need to change.
Yeah, I think we talked about it last time, Steve. I think, shelters, there's always a big push. Oh, we need more shelters. And, when you look at the AT, I think there's a shelter every 5 or 6 miles. You could easily go shelter hopping. ATC is looking at that going, wait, we're a little overbuilt here. I personally think shelters cause problems. Definitely. So I think there needs to be a step back and say, all right, how do we approach this growth on the Pinhoti, because I see the Pinhoti continuing to grow as it is by leaps and bounds. And how do we make sure that we sustain this trail for that growth and the impact that we're going to see in maybe 10, 20 years, looking like the AT or even more?
One of the impressions I got from you, Nathan, when we spoke before was that, and maybe it was just in my fault in my mind, that you thought that the push was to incorporate, almost subsume the Pinhoti. But the way in which Jeff's talking now, this is an entirely different trail. Is that a different impression to what you had?
There's been the original pitch, like Jeff said, when it came out with the Cheaha State Park behind it, was to use the Pinhoti. And that ruffled some feathers, and they got a lot of backlash. And quite honestly, I think Cheaha State Park got kicked in the teeth. You go to their website or Facebook page today, they don't talk about it anymore. Whatever reason, I think that might be the reason, because they got a lot of backlash. So Jeff, I don't know when, but anyway, he's proposing a parallel or a separate trail from Cheaha. And when you talk about geologically, Cheaha is not the end of the Appalachian chain. We, above 1,000 feet, it would be flagged. So there's missing 85 miles of great trail in Alabama. That's as far as infrastructure, we got to really take a look at that and figure out how to do that. And I quite honestly, I don't think shelters is the answer.
Okay.
And let me follow up on that, because one of the things that really fries my bacon.
Great expression, by the way.
Like a
great expression.
Yeah. Oh, I stopped eating pork a couple of years ago because I've aged out of pork. So fry my bacon may sound like a good thing, but it's not. Right. It's not to me. That grinds my teeth. Because all right, so I look like a Johnny-come-lately to this. Actually, at2al.net was the first web page up last June about the AT2AL effort, and it was explicitly to build a new trail. I'm a team player, and sometimes when you're a team player, you got to just bite your lip. I support our team's efforts. I support even those who believe the trail must come over the Pinhoti. I support them as part of my team. I don't support their argument. I support the only way forward is to build a new trail segment. So this has been part of our discussion from the beginning. It's just when they had a big splash, and I actually wrote 2 paragraphs in support of that news release that was very cautious. It did not mention using the Pinhoti at all. It meant about, we have great mountains in Alabama. We have the best trail. The best trail in any state in the union, I'm sorry, is the Pinhoti Trail. I say that as an Alabama citizen, very proud of Alabama. Okay? But I've gotten lost in this discussion, and we're going to bring that back. I have our team. There's been a lot of our team is engaged in the recent amendment to the Alabama Constitution to allocate, I think, $85 million, which passed with 77% of the vote to Alabama state parks. So a lot of my team members have been really involved in that, and we've kind of had to focus on that for a while. But
I would like to see, Jeff, your team. I would like to see your team have a conference or discussion with other parties like the ATC, like Pinhoti groups, like Georgia, to make sure everybody is understanding and get everybody's opinion. I think some of the state officials, when they got one side of the story, I think it's really easy to tell one side of this story and get, oh wow, that's great, let's do that, that's incredible, everybody in the world would love it, when in fact that's not necessarily the case.
That's right, absolutely. And Nathan, we need to do that. I've spoken with the presidents of the Alabama Pinhoti Trail Association. I'm Haywood Warren, and I've spoken with the president of Georgia Pinhoti Trail Association, Benton McKay Trail Association, and Georgia ATC. And it reassured them that what I'm proposing is to build a new trail segment. Now, when we're talking about the politics of it publicly, it's hard for people to come out, given that the perception is all, hey, let's take over these trails, to come out and support it. However, the Alabama Pinhoti Trail Association's letter, was very couched and very careful. And I told Hayward, I appreciate that letter, because they said, we will not support it if it uses a Pinhoti. But if you can get the Georgia Pinhoti, the Benton MacKaye, the Georgia ATC, and the ATC on board and building a new trail, we do not oppose that.
Hang on.
That's a very nuanced
Do you
discussion.
oppose it, Nathan? Building a new let's say if the only thing that comes out of this is what you would call a 21st century intentionally accessible trail that goes from Chia to somewhere near Springer to link up if necessary. How bad is that? Just have a brand new trail, and it can be its own trail, and then you petition to make it Southern Terminus.
I tell you what I do like, here's what I do like in Jeff's proposal, is I do like loop trails. I think, accessible, however you want to call them, bigger, whatever the proposal is. But I do like loop trails, and I would love to see loop trails to go to these communities, like down to Oxford or whatever. Heflin's got a spur trail going into their town already through the national forest. That's a great idea, and I don't see anything wrong with that. But what I do see as one of the difficulties and problems with adding more trails in the same area is the labor. It's very labor intensive, sure. To build it, who's going to build it? Where's that money? Where's that labor going to come from? And who's going to maintain it? We have some great maintainers on the Pinhoti all through Alabama, mm-hmm. and Georgia does a great job. But they're stretched, right? So mm-hmm. they don't want the AT here, and let's say the AT moves parallel. One of the two was going to suffer, right? From a labor perspective, from a use and whatever.
It's a dilution of effort, I presume it becomes, doesn't it? And that's
does.
Although sometimes, though, I think if you've got people passionate enough for the idea, and say the thing that's really struck me through this conversation, Jeff, is the beautiful thought of everybody being able to get on the trail. So why not make that the goal? Build this fantastic trail people can get on that happens to be available to be the Southern Terminus if people want it in the end. But at the moment, I think people get, you said yourself, you're part of a group that some people think the Pinhoti should be part of it, and yet you don't agree with that, even though you support it because you're part of that group. It would seem a lot of sense to me that to have a trail that goes through towns and makes it accessible is a wonderful thing for people to have. It doesn't necessarily wouldn't demean it by not being part of the AT. It just may be a possible AT in the future. And I think, that to me will be a really great way forward to start thinking of it in those terms, a trail for its own, to make its own strengths and become an important trail in its own right.
Of course, Steve. And let me make a couple of points. One, I support the people who support using the Pinhoti for the AT. I do not support. I'm 110% against making the Georgia, Alabama Pinhotis or the Benton MacKaye Trail part of the AT. I just want to make sure everybody gets that. All right. And the second thing is we're back to economy. And I love the Pinhoti. The popular perception of the AT right now, and I say popular, I don't mean just the hiking community. I mean, the people across this state of Alabama that would be willing to contribute dollars or effort to it are greater when you're talking about the AT than you are the Pinhoti. Now, I agree with Nathan. We need to change that perception. We need everybody in the state of Alabama to realize how great the Pinhoti is and just say, yeah, we're going to support that. We're going to get out there and maintain. But I think, I'd bet, I don't know. Again, I'm like an academic. I don't know the answer to this. But I bet that we could generate more effort and more dollars if we were talking about the AT, just because of the popular perception. Those of us in the hiking community, we know what the Pinhoti is. We value it. We know how great a trail it is. The popular perception, where the effort and the money comes from, is different. They've probably seen a walk in the woods. They've probably read the book.
Shocking film.
In
shocking
their mind,
film.
it's
Great book, but shocking film.
If that's here's my opinion on that. If that's the case, in which I think you're right, I think we need to market, promote, do however we do it, the Pinhoti to get to that perception level, that popularity level. And I think we're there. I think in a popularity, if you look at the graph of popularity for the Pinhoti, we're very, very young. We're 4 or 5 years old, maybe. Mm-hmm. I mean, we started getting growth, you mentioned Jennifer Farr Davis, Darwin, and then Gut Hook hit, and then we just skyrocketed. And we're going to continue on that growth pattern, and I think we're going to get there. I honestly think we'll be just as popular, or even could be more than the AT in the future. I don't know how far out in the future, but I think we will be. And we're seeing that people come here to hike the Pinhoti, and they love it. They're like, man, this is just as good or better than the AT. I don't have to, they just love it. It's a great trail, and I think we're going to get there. And I think bringing the AT over will take away from that, and that'll take that growth down, and it'll take money and effort away and move it somewhere else. And I think that's detrimental to the Pinhoti.
Right, and I agree with that. However, when I approach this, Nathan, I want you to understand that I'm going to try to do everything I can, little Jeff Hayes, to make sure that the support for the Pinhoti does not wane. But let me address how the AT could help that. You and I see a lot of people who come through on the Pinhoti, and the thing I hear most of, in good and bad, is that we don't see another person there. We get to go and hike, and it's almost like the Benton MacKay. There's nobody. We can go out and hike 3 or 4 days and not see anybody else. If the Pinhoti experiences the same growth and becomes the same as the AT, the Pinhoti will have to fundamentally change to be able to accommodate that many feet. Yeah. It cannot, and it would change.
Absolutely.
It would change fundamentally.
Yeah, and I think through that slow, organic growth, and we can work with. We're working with the Alabama Trails Foundation is doing studies on sustainability. Yes. I think that can grow organically with that growth. And I'm not saying we'll have 1,000 people a day in next year, but if we just remain the Pinhoti, I think we'll be able to maintain that growth and figure out what we need to do. And I think we have the capability and the resources and the place to do that.
Can I ask you guys where this goes next? What happens now? You've got slightly different. You've got very similar views in many ways, and you're both fervent Pinhoti supporters. And I've got to tell listeners that Nathan has a shirt that says "Pinhoti Forever" on it, which is great. and I think people might be interested in what's the state of play right now. Where do we think this is going to be in the next, say, 5 years, Jeff?
Well, for my part. I'm sorry, I have to pause because I'm not sure how much I can talk about what our team is doing going forward, because I haven't cleared it with them. They don't even know I'm on this podcast. So I need to just pause on that. I'll speak about me personally. I am an academic, and I am going to go to George Mason to the Fenwick Collection and read deeply in the ATC's minutes. And I am going to go up to Dartmouth to the Ronner Special Collections and read in Benton MacKay's correspondence. And Nathan, if you'd like to go with me, I'd be more than happy for us to do that together. I think if we could, I understand that people don't trust me because of the way we have fumbled this. I get that. But if you and I both did that, we could both sit down and come to an understanding of what actually did transpire then. And again, I'm an academic. That means I'm willing to be proven wrong. But let's find out. And there may be no records whatsoever. There may be records that nobody has looked at in 100 years, and it would be fun to do that. You've been to Dartmouth. How many times? Nathan?
Dartmouth twice. I graduated there in 88.
No, but the AT goes right through Dartmouth.
I ended a section hike there, and I started a section hike there, so I've been there twice.
Yeah, so it's not the town. What town is? I can't remember. Anyway, so for me personally, that's one part.
Hanover.
Yeah.
Hanover, yes, thank you. And the trail goes right through Hanover. It's a great trail town. So that's for me personally, and that's that is an academic exercise, and I feel strongly about it, and I want to answer those questions. I'm also going to continue to advocate, personally, AT to Alabama with the new trail segment. And I'm going to engage with the towns here in Alabama. I'm going to engage with the trail clubs. I'm going to engage with our elected representatives locally and in D.C. because I'm going to advocate for this. I am going to engage with the ATC and have initially. Now, I expect no's at different levels. I get that. And ultimately, our pay grades are way too low to be the ones who decide this. The ones that will ultimately decide this are up to the secretaries of agriculture and the secretaries of the interior. And a part that, Nathan, that I think makes me nervous, and I want you to know this, is that they could say at that level, in spite of my advocating for a new trail segment, they could say at that level, look, we got trails already, let's just use them. And they could do that. But I want to make sure everybody understands I'm going to fight as hard as I can against that. I don't believe that should happen. So that's what I'm going to do. Our team also is going to do some structured, formal survey work. We are going to do some more PR. We are going to promote this idea. We're not going to let it stop. I'm just going to do as much as I can to make sure that our promotion is much more nuanced.
So when would it stop? What would make it stop? What would make that effort stop?
Well, see, if it's just me, then it's my energy and determination.
Right. I mean, if you get a no, at what level or what, where does that effort stop? I mean, I feel like we as an Alabamians are wasting resources, time, and energy where we could be putting all this in the Pinhoti and making it to what it could be to accomplish the goals that you're probably going after.
Yeah, Nathan, I'm wanting the state of Alabama to share the load. Again, you're right. The Alabama Trails Foundation in supporting the Pinhoti, et cetera, is their number one task. That's, you can see that their number one job is the Pinhoti. I'm just wanting some, let's say, equal time. I would love to have an organization that doesn't take anything away from the Alabama Trails Foundation, supported the Pinhoti, not in dollars or in energy, but is just on a par with it to support bringing the AT to Alabama. That's what I would like. I think there's a bunch of untapped resources in this state for trails. I think there are. Again, there are a lot of folks in the state, or some folks anyway, that I've spoken with that do get engaged with this idea of accessibility. And when I hike the Pinhoti for the Trails Foundation, one of the things they asked me to do is identify segments on the Pinhoti that could become an ADA compliant trail section. They did, and I did. And I identified 3 different really small sections. If you put them end to end, you maybe could get a mile. Like out of Pine Glen Campground going northbound, there's that flat stretch by that creek that would be great for an ADA accessible trail, but there's not a lot. There's very few places. So there are folks that are engaged with that, thinking about a different type of trail. They are. I hear you about taking resources from Pinhoti. I don't want to do that. I just want to.
Yeah, but to be fair, if there's if resources, time, energy, money is 100%, and it's currently on the Pinhoti, adding anything to this equal time makes it 50-50. So that by definition,
it's not 100%.
Okay, well, it may not be.
If
you say there is actually resources out there which can be devoted to the new thing, that is a different thing entirely. So that becomes a money issue or an economy issue, I guess, as well. Nathan, where do you think we're going to be in 5 years' time?
I mean, honestly, I think this has such a small chance of success of moving the terminus of the AT because all the entities and the laws and the structure around it. ATC has a resolution against it. Georgia State Senate has a resolution against it. All the Pinhoti clubs that I know, the volunteers, they're against it. Georgia, when you start talking about moving the terminus of the AT, don't even consider the user base that would be against it of AT hikers all throughout the East Coast and then really around the nation. But the businesses that are in Georgia, that would be affected by this. You're talking about having a major impact on them, Georgia, the first part of the AT, that would be detrimental. I think that's something to consider, and whether or not we want to, disturb that. I think that's.
Yeah, well, and let me respond to that if I can, Steve. I know you're getting frustrated because we're at a 1 hour and 5 minutes on it.
No, I'm not. On a
40-minute segment.
I'm not getting frustrated with it, but I wanted to pull it in within an hour. But it doesn't matter. I think what I'd like to say is that as a person who knows the least about this, which I do, you both educated me, and it's been very helpful. And there are things on both sides I really like, actually. What I like is also that you, particularly, Jeff, are specifically saying that you don't want the Pinhoti to be part of it, which is great. I love the idea of the accessibility in some ways that everybody could get out there. That itself would be a wonderful thing. So, I do need to pull this to a close. So I know. I think an hour seems sufficient to talk about this issue. I'm almost wondering, and I don't want to flog a dead horse, as they say, but I'm almost wondering why there isn't anybody who's actually come on who does want to use the Pinhoti. I'd love that somebody said, well, this is the reason we should use the Pinhoti. That would have also been an interesting thing. So if anybody's out there wants to do that, I'll be happy to have that conversation as well. But look, I do appreciate you guys taking the time and the effort this morning to think about this and talk to me about this and educate me about this, and hopefully by extension the listeners as well. So thanks very much indeed for coming on the show.
Thanks, Steve.
No, thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Jeff.
So what do you think? For me, I hadn't realised before I read his paper that Jeff was opposed to using the Pinhoti to take the Southern Terminus to Alabama. And what he said made a lot of sense to me. However, starting a new trail, making it accessible to all, not impacting the Pinhoti, and not moving the Southern Terminus all makes sense to me. But Jeff still supports that last part of moving the Southern Terminus. In many ways, the goal of the group he's working with doesn't align with his goals. So they really need to resolve the direction they're going to take. As I said when we spoke, I'm pretty much convinced that the AT is, well, darn perfect. And it doesn't need to extend south. I thought it was interesting that Nathan mentioned that there are Bamida Baxter hikers this year trying to emulate the Great Nimblewall. That's fine. It's a fantastic adventure. Doing that doesn't necessitate relocating the start of the AT. It simply emphasises the riches in trail that we have here in America, and that there are many ways to get from point A to point B. In the end, Nathan and Jeff seem to have about 90% in common, maybe 95%. I respect Jeff's opinions and his acceptance of my offer to come on. I simply don't buy into the need to change the already perfect. I'll see you next week.